The registration desk smelled like disinfectant and bad decisions. I had been standing in line for 20 minutes, watching the Dothraki military attaché work through the queue ahead of me, and the expression on his face when he reached our delegation's table was the same one I had seen on 14 species across 9 summits. He looked at our badges. He looked at us. He looked back at the badges as if he had misread something important. He had not misread anything. The Earth Diplomatic Corps. 12 members. No weapons. No military escorts. No ship in orbit. Just us, our luggage, and the kind of professional comm that takes years to build and costs more than most people understand. My name is Mara Voss. I have been doing this job for 14 years. I have sat across tables from beings who could split a moon in half and ask them, politely, to reconsider. I have eaten bad food in worse rooms on the edges of space that most humans never see. I have signed documents that stopped 3 different conflicts before they officially started, and my name is not in any history file that anyone can access. That is the job. The Dothraki attaché, 7 limbs, ceremonial armor that had been in his family long enough to mean something real, leaned toward his translator and said something that the device rendered as a polite clarification but carried the shape of a question that was not polite at all. His translator said it this way: "Is this the complete Earth delegation?" Claire Ford, our head of delegation, smiled at him. Claire had been in the Corps for 22 years. Her smile was a tool she used with precision, and it was also, completely and genuinely, real, which is the harder trick. "It is," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. The way someone nods when they have decided something they will not say out loud. He felt sorry for us. I thought, God help him. We moved through registration and into the main atrium of the Veth Conclave's 14th Interstellar Peace Summit. The building was enormous in the way that only things built by committee can be. Every species had sent an architectural preference, and the result was a space that moved between curved and angular and back again, with gravity adjustments every 50 meters and 17 atmospheric filtration systems cycling at once, trying to stay breathable for everyone and mostly succeeding. Other delegations were already in their zones. The Dothraki had 12 attaches in full ceremonial armor and 4 advisors who appeared to be doing quiet, continuous math about everyone in the room. The Vreth Collective had sent a war priest and 8 members of what their official documentation listed as a spiritual advisory council, which was either genuine or the most creative rebranding of a military advisory team I had encountered in this decade. The consortium of 5 had a ship in orbit. Not docked. Not running cargo. Just parked up there, running its lights on a slow pulse every 30 seconds. The way you leave a large and obvious thing on the table during dinner and then pretend to talk about something else. Dr. Lena Hart appeared at my shoulder with a cup of something warm. She was 62 years old and had the face of a person who had sat with more grief than most beings ever witness and had come through the other side of it with a patience that was almost architectural in its depth. Dothraki over there looks concerned about us, she said. He thinks we are helpless. We are, in certain ways, she said pleasantly. Coffee. Owen Clark was already in conversation with 210 delegates, drawing something on a napkin. Owen was our civil engineer. He had rebuilt 14 cities on 5 different planets and had an energy about him that made people want to explain their problems to him within 10 minutes of meeting him. The 10 were small, 2 of them, quiet in the way of a species that had learned quietness over a long time. They were watching Owen's napkin drawing with something that looked like cautious relief. Sophie Rowe was setting up a small food service near our delegation's table, which I had requested and the summit organizers had approved after 15 minutes of genuine confusion about what a chef was doing at a diplomatic summit. What Sophie was doing was what Sophie always did. She was making food. The thing about food, and I have watched this work across 11 species in 9 summits, is that it is the oldest negotiating tool in the history of any civilization anywhere. Every species eats. Every species has something they consume that carries meaning. You give someone food that surprises them with how good it is, and for 30 seconds they stop being afraid of you. 30 seconds is enough, if you know what to do with it. The Dothraki attaché found his way to our table 2 hours into the opening day, pulled by a smell he did not have a word for. Sophie served him a slow-braised dish over stone-ground grain with a layered sauce she had built from 3 different pantries and a memory of her grandmother's kitchen. He ate 3 portions. He still thought we were helpless. He was eating his third bowl of evidence that we were not, and he still thought we were helpless. That gap, between what people perceive and what is actually true, is the whole job. That gap is what 14 years has taught me to live in without flinching. The summit's first plenary session opened that evening with the standard procedural reading of the conclave accords, the listing of represented species, and the formal statement of purposes. Claire delivered Earth's statement in 4 sentences. No promises. No posturing. Just a plain description of what we had come to do, which was help find a resolution that everyone could live with. The Vreth War Priest's statement was 47 sentences and contained 3 separate references to his coalition's military capability. Rathvor, the Supreme Dothraki delegate, delivered his statement standing, which required the room's gravity to shift by 8%, and it was the kind of speech that reminded you why these summits existed at all. Borders. Resources. The old arguments wearing new language. He looked at Earth's table twice during the speech. I wrote a note to myself. It said, "Ask Lena if the Dothraki junior attaché in the corridor is all right." Then I went back to listening. Everyone at that summit was carrying something they had not announced. The Vreth War Priest was carrying 3 border disputes and a debt arrangement with 2 other species that the public record did not fully reflect. The consortium was carrying an internal fracture that had been quietly widening for 2 years. Rathvor was carrying a deep personal conviction that expansion was survival and that any species too gentle to contest it deserved what followed. Earth was carrying the Kepler incident. We do not talk about it at summits. We do not put it in our diplomatic statements. We do not reference it in negotiations. We carry it the way you carry something that has permanently changed you, quietly, carefully, always aware of its weight. 3 words. That was all I ever wrote about it in my notes. After Kepler, we agreed. I wrote that once, years ago, and never explained it, because some things are better understood by their shape than their contents. That first night, lying in the delegation quarters the conclave had assigned to us, I listened to the hum of 17 atmospheric systems and thought about the next 6 days. The Dothraki wanted to expand their territory. The consortium wanted leverage over smaller species. The Vreth wanted something they had not yet named, which is always the most dangerous kind of wanting. And we had a chef, a trauma counselor, an engineer, and a gap between perception and reality that I had been living in for 14 years. I closed my eyes. God help them all, I thought. I meant it completely. Day 2 started with the Vreth collective walking out. By every measure it was a textbook exit. The War Priest stood, delivered a prepared statement about procedural disrespect, and led his 8 council members through the east corridor doors with the kind of coordinated movement that made clear they had rehearsed it. The doors closed behind them at a volume the entire floor was meant to hear. Claire did not look up from her notes. Owen kept writing on his napkin. Lena poured more tea. The Vreth returned 4 hours later. They always return. I have watched this same sequence across 6 species over 10 years and the structure never changes. The walkout is a statement. The return is a statement. Together they say, we are serious, we are capable of walking away, and we are still choosing to be here. Both halves are necessary. The actual negotiations do not begin until both have been delivered. I could have set a watch by it. While the Vreth were out, the real work of the summit ran quietly in the side corridors. The plenary hall is where summits are performed. The corridors and small rooms off the main floor are where they are actually made. When a junior delegate of one species ends up near a water station at the same moment as someone from a different delegation who happens to have a kind face, that is not an accident. That is the job happening at the level where it actually works. Lena had a quality of appearing in the right place with a kind face. She had been doing it for 30 years and it looked effortless because it had stopped being a technique long ago. It was simply who she was. The young Dothraki attaché whose name translated approximately to Vel was the newest member of Rathvor's delegation. Probably his first major summit. The Dothraki are a species organized around clear hierarchy and defined purpose, and when purpose becomes uncertain their structure does not have a clean internal process for managing the pressure that builds. Vel found a corner of the east corridor and was doing something with his secondary limbs that Lena recognized immediately, across every species she had ever worked with. She sat down near him. Not next to him. Near him. The difference matters. She had a cup of tea she did not particularly need and a quality of attention that she gave freely. She sat there while the summit noise continued in the halls around them, and she asked nothing, and eventually Vel spoke through the translator on his collar. The device produced, "I don't understand why we are here." Lena said, "Which part?" A long pause. Then, "Any of it." She nodded. "I have been doing this for 30 years, she said, "and some days I don't understand it either." The not understanding is actually fine. You stay anyway. It is not a profound diplomatic strategy. It is not a technique from any training manual. It is just a true thing offered to another person in a corridor by someone who meant it. Vel had lunch with Lena that afternoon. Rathvor noticed his expression when he registered his junior attaché sitting at a table with an Earth diplomat, sharing Sophie's food and appearing, against all reasonable expectation, slightly less like a being carrying something too heavy, was one I noted and filed carefully. It was the expression of someone whose picture of a thing is beginning to fail against the thing itself. He filed it away. I watched him doing it. Owen, meanwhile, had made the infrastructure subcommittee strange in the best possible way. This session was a procedural formality. The Accords required it. Most delegations sent junior representatives. Owen went because post-conflict infrastructure is the center of his entire professional life and he has opinions about water reclamation systems that most people find exhausting and he finds essential. He brought his napkins. By the session's second hour, 6 different species representatives were leaning over the same table together, arguing about soil remediation rates and structural load tolerances in low-gravity settlement rebuilds. Not about borders. Not about who had the larger ship in orbit. About the practical mechanics of what you do after everything else is settled, the business of putting something back together where a ruin used to be. People argue differently about practical things. It is extremely difficult to fear someone you are currently in a genuine disagreement with about the optimal concrete aggregate specification for load-bearing walls in reduced gravity environments. Owen had known this his entire professional life. It was why Claire brought him. The day's third development was less quiet. The consortium's lead delegate, Prothvel, delivered an afternoon statement about what his documentation called territorial consolidation protocols. In plain terms, it was a legal framework for absorbing the border territories of smaller species through debt mechanisms. It was precise. It was documented. It would take 3 full sessions to untangle. And it was aimed directly at the 10. Both 10 delegates went still when Prothvel spoke. They were a small species, their civilization agricultural in its economy and its history, and they had come to this summit with what their formal paperwork described as a border integrity concern, and what I would describe as a quiet fear they were too disciplined to let onto their faces. The younger 10 delegate looked down at her hands. I wrote on my pad, debt mechanism, 10, dates needed. Claire slid me a note without looking up. It said, tomorrow. I nodded. Tomorrow. After the session, Rathvor paused at Earth's table on his way out. His translator was switched off. He was not there for a recorded conversation. He looked at the table. At Sophie's food station. At Owen's stack of napkin drawings that no one had cleared away. At Lena's teacup. He looked at me. I looked back. He left. Owen waited until the room was nearly empty. He is trying to understand what we are doing, he said. Yes. What do we tell him? Nothing yet. He will work it out. What if he works it out wrong? I thought about Vel eating lunch with Lena. About the Daraki attaché who had eaten 3 portions of Sophie's food and still walked in believing what he had walked in believing. About the long, slow process by which a picture of something gets replaced by the thing itself. We give him another day, I said. That night, the consortium's ship changed its pulse pattern. It was subtle, the kind of signal that only shows up in navigational feed analysis. Our support team flagged it in the overnight report. I read the report at 4 in the morning. I set it down on the bunk and looked at the ceiling and thought about what day 3 would bring. Summits do not go wrong dramatically. They go wrong in small steps. A statement here. A corridor conversation there. A ship changing its pulse pattern at 3 in the morning because someone has already decided something and wants someone else to feel the weight of it before it is announced. We were in the small steps. I went back to sleep at 5:30. I dreamed about Baltimore, which I do sometimes in rooms that smell like disinfectant and controlled tension. I dreamed about my father's kitchen, which was small and loud and always had something on the stove, and I woke up 90 minutes later carrying the particular kind of homesickness that does not go away with distance but gets familiar enough to carry without noticing. I made coffee. Day 3. Rathvor asked his question on day 4. On day 3, he watched. I could feel his attention across the plenary floor the way you feel a change in atmospheric pressure, not sharp, not sudden, just a shift in the quality of the room. His advisors were reading something. Their conversations had different angles. Twice in the morning session his senior advisor looked at our table and then quickly away, with an expression that was not hostility but something more careful than hostility. Something like recalculation. By day 4, he had formed the question and was ready to ask it. He stood during the morning plenary session. The room's gravity adjusted for him. He delivered a standard territorial position paper for 12 minutes, and then in the final paragraph he stopped delivering a paper and asked something that the entire floor had been circling for 4 days. His translator produced it in standard Galactic Common, for the record, and in the interest of transparency between all parties, the Dothraki delegation requests clarification on Earth's military positioning. Given the presence of significant military assets from multiple delegations at and around this summit, the complete absence of any Earth military presence, either here or in this system, represents a gap in understanding that this delegation would like formally addressed. He paused. Where is Earth's military? The room went quiet all at once. 17 translation feeds carrying the same question. Every species on the floor holding still in their own particular way. The consortium advisors exchanging glances. The Vreth war priest very carefully not moving. Claire's attention shifted to me. There are moments in a room where the direction of a thing becomes clear. Not because of rank or preparation. Because of the specific shape of a question and who in the room has lived with its answer long enough to give it correctly. I stood up. From my seat. Not the head delegate position. An attaché standing in a plenary session is irregular. I did it anyway. Exactly where we left them, I said. The room waited for the rest of the sentence. There was no rest of the sentence. Rathvor's secondary limbs made a small adjustment that I had learned, in 4 days, meant he was focusing. Clarify, he said. I pulled out my chair and sat back down. The room was still in formal plenary posture. I sat. Earth's military is not here, I said. They are where they always are when we come to one of these summits. Waiting. Waiting for what? For us to need them. The Vreth war priest shifted in his seat. Prothvel wrote something on his pad. The room was doing calculations I could almost hear. If parties to this summit interpret Earth's lack of military presence as weakness, Rathvor began. You will not be the first, I said. It came out gently. The way a doctor delivers a prognosis that is simply and completely true and does not require decoration. The way a geologist describes a sediment layer. Old. Factual. Recorded. Every species that has made that interpretation, I said, has eventually stopped making interpretations. Silence again. The kind with weight and texture. The Vreth war priest, you argue deterrence through absence. That the absence of your military is itself a warning signal. I laughed. I want to be clear about that laugh. It was not performed. It was not a tactic. It was the genuine, spontaneous response of someone who had just heard a framing so close to right and so completely wrong at the same time that the gap between the two was, briefly, funny in a way that was also a little sad. No, I said, when I had it under control. We claim peace through absence. Those are different things. Deterrence means showing the weapon and letting the weapon be the point. That is not what we are doing. Then what are you doing? Keeping the weapon from having to be the point. Rathvor had sat back down. The gravity adjusted. He looked at me for a long moment with his translator on but no formal statement being recorded. What happened at Kepler, he said. The room changed again. Something colder. The specific quality of silence that arrives when a name is spoken that everyone recognizes was not supposed to be asked about. I looked at my notepad. That is not on today's agenda, I said. He let it go. Which surprised me. I had not read Rathvor as someone who let things go with any ease. But he let that one sit, and the session moved forward, and the moment passed and left something behind in the room that nobody named and everyone felt for the rest of the day. Owen was waiting in the corridor when I came out. He fell in beside me. We walked for a while before he said anything. "You didn't mention Kepler," he said. I didn't. He did. That is worse. Yes. Why is it worse? Because it means they have been doing serious research. Owen slowed slightly. Are they finding the right files? Some of them. The ones that are accessible. And the ones that are not. I stopped. Owen stopped beside me. Down the corridor, through an open meeting room door, I could see Lena teaching Vel a card game. She had produced a deck from somewhere, as she always did, and she was explaining the rules in the careful way she explained everything, not as rules but as logic. One thing follows another. This is what you have. This is what you can do with it. Look at what is in your hand before you decide what you cannot do. Vel kept misplaying his hand. Lena kept correcting him without making the correction feel like a correction. I watched them for a moment. The files that are not accessible, I said, are the ones that will not need to be found. Because they will not become relevant. Owen was quiet for a few seconds. And if they become relevant? Then what those files describe would be outdated anyway, I said. Because what happened would not be historical. It would be new. He nodded slowly. Then, Sophie found local grain in the market section and made something. It is genuinely remarkable. How remarkable? The kind that makes you feel you owe someone an apology for enjoying it that much. I am coming, I said. We walked back. Behind us, in the small meeting room, Lena dealt another hand and told Vel, in the patient voice, to look at what he was holding before he decided what he could not do. It was advice about a card game. It was also just very good advice. I wrote one line in my notes when I got back to the table: Lena is the best diplomat on this floor and she would be offended if I said so. Then I went to find Sophie's new dish. It was exactly as described. The intelligence archive leak happened before sunrise on day 5. I know the exact time because I was awake. I had been awake since 3, which is a habit developed over years and never fully resolved. I was sitting in the delegation's small common area with a coffee I had made badly in the dark when my communication unit lit up with a message from our support team. Someone, the origin point was scrambled through 4 different relay nodes, which meant it was either the consortium's intelligence division or someone who had learned from them, had released a compiled archive to the open press feeds. It was labeled, Earth Armed Forces, Full Historical Assessment. The stated source was the Galactic Intelligence Cooperative, which technically does not release documents about a species without that species' consent. They had done it anyway. The intention, as far as our support team could reconstruct from the initial distribution pattern, was to expose Earth's position as a bluff. Show the room what they were actually sitting across from. Let the historical record speak for itself. I set my coffee down. Then I picked it up again. The thing about that file, the thing everyone reading it was about to learn, was that it did speak. Just not in the direction that anyone releasing it had calculated. I sent a brief message to Claire. She responded in 4 words: I saw it. Continue. I sat with my badly made coffee and thought about a room I had been in 15 years earlier. My training instructor's office, which smelled like old paper and a slightly underwatered plant on the window ledge that he kept alive through sheer stubbornness. He had a way of delivering information like he was handing you a piece of equipment and wanted you to understand its function before you put it in your pocket. He slid a folder across the desk. I was 26 years old. Read this, he said. Then tell me why we do not send these people to peace summits. The folder contained a single engagement report. One event. 47 days long. It was not the largest engagement in Earth's military history by geographic scale. It was not the oldest. It was chosen because of what it illustrated, which was not strength. Strength is easy to document, but commitment. The difference between those two things is the whole story. Strength says, look at what we can do. Commitment says, we will not stop until it is finished. The report described a complete mobilization. Industrial, logistical, and human, so total that by the end of the 47 days there was no part of the involved society that had not been directed toward a single purpose. Not as conquest. Not as expansion. As a response. As the conclusion of a thing that had been started by someone else who had not thought carefully about what they were starting. I put the folder down after 20 minutes. I had a specific thought, which was, these are my people, and I do not think I fully understood that until this moment. My instructor said, tell me why. I said, because if you send them to a peace summit, it means the peace is already over. He nodded once. Now you understand the job, he said. The job is not keeping Earth's military history secret. The information is accessible. The job is ensuring that the military is never the point, because the moment it becomes the point, the summit is a formality and everyone in the room is simply going through the remaining steps before something worse begins. The job is the space between what could happen and what does not. I showered, dressed, and went down to the plenary floor 2 hours before the session opened. Sophie was already there setting up. She looked at me once and knew, the way she always knew, that the character of the day had shifted overnight. Big day, she said. Possibly, I said. Coffee. Please. She made it better than I had. The floor filled differently that morning. Delegations that normally arrived in their own time and their own order came faster. The Vreth War Priest came early, which he had not done on any previous day. The consortium group arrived as a complete unit, moving together, which they had also not done before. They had all been reading. The second thing I noticed was the quality of attention directed at Earth's table. Not hostile. Not frightened. Something more complicated, the expression of people who have spent several hours revising a picture they thought was settled. The Daraki attaché who had eaten 3 portions of Sophie's food on day 1 looked across the floor at me and the expression on his face was not the careful sympathy of someone feeling sorry for a helpless group. It was the expression that comes when a gap closes. When the distance between what you believed and what is true collapses fast enough that the collapse itself is felt as a physical event. Rathvor arrived last. He always took his seat last. I had assumed this was a protocol. Now I was less certain. He sat. The gravity adjusted. He looked at his advisors' faces, then at the room, then at Earth's table. He looked at me with an expression that was neither a challenge nor an accusation. It was a reassessment. The session opened on procedural items. But by the second agenda point, Prothvel of the consortium stood. He had a different quality than in previous sessions. The authority was still present but the comfort underneath it had changed. He delivered a statement framing the archive as an act of contextualizing Earth's contributions to galactic diplomacy. He said it was meant to support informed dialogue. He said the consortium valued transparency. He said all of it with the precision of someone who had spent several hours realizing that the document he had deployed as a revelation had revealed something he had not fully accounted for. Claire listened to every word. Then she said, cleanly, in 4 words, "We have no comment." That was the end of that. I watched Rathvor process Claire's response. No defense. No elaboration. No performance of being unaffected, because that itself would have been a performance and Claire did not perform. Just, we have no comment. Because there was nothing to comment on. The file said what it said. The history was what it was. We were here, without the history, doing what we came to do. Owen spent most of the day in the infrastructure subcommittee and came back in the afternoon with more napkin drawings and a long, detailed, technical disagreement he had won with a Vreth Council member about atmospheric stabilizer failure points and post-conflict settlements. He described it as one of the most genuinely productive hours of his professional year. Lena was in corridor conversations from 9 in the morning. Sophie fed people. I sat in the sessions and watched a room that had been reading for 6 hours try to recalibrate what it was sitting across from. The day's final session was shorter than scheduled. Prothvel's consolidation protocol paper was moved to procedural review, which was a polite framing of a process long enough that the summit would close before it advanced. The 10 delegates said nothing during the session. The younger one looked at our table briefly when the tabling was announced. I gave her nothing back. Not because I had nothing to give. Because the moment was hers, not mine, and what it needed from me was space. That evening, in the corridor outside the delegation quarters, Rathvor stopped me. No advisors. He held his translator piece in his secondary limb for a moment, then put it back on. The archive, he said. Your people built everything in those records. Yes. And they stayed home. Yes. He looked at the corridor wall. Where I come from, restraint of that kind is either weakness or a form of respect so complete it has no standard name. What does your instinct tell you? I said. He looked at me. I am not sure I trust my instinct regarding your species, he said. It has been wrong before. I thought, this is the whole job, happening in a corridor at night. Ask me again after the summit, I said. He put his translator back on his collar and walked away. I stood in the corridor for a moment. 30 meters down, through a closed door, I could hear Sophie cleaning up from the evening service, the particular sound of containers being sealed and surfaces being wiped with the steady rhythm of someone who is genuinely satisfied with their work. I stood there and listened to it for a while. It sounded, in that specific moment, like the entire point. The last day of the summit began with a kind of calm that I had learned, over 14 years, to read as a warning. It is the calm of a room where multiple things have already been decided privately and what remains is delivery. You feel it in the pace of arrival. The way delegates move through the space at slightly different angles than the previous day. The particular quality of eye contact between people who are carrying something from the night before. The 10 delegates arrived first. They were always early, by species habit, but that morning they were the first people on the floor, which they had not been on any previous day. They sat at their small table with the stillness of beings who had spent a night arriving at something and were now ready for whatever came next. The consortium group arrived as a complete unit again. Prothvel in the center. His expression the same one he had worn since the archive leak, authoritative, but with a new calculation running underneath it that he had not fully resolved. Lena sat beside me. She had her tea and her card deck in her coat pocket. She looked at the room once, carefully, and then looked at her tea. Today, she said. Yes, I said. The morning session opened with standard procedural items. Progress reviews. Tabled items. Scheduling. Rathvor sat with the gravity adjusted as always. He looked at Earth's table twice in the first 30 minutes with the same expression he had worn in the corridor the previous night, still working something out, not finished with it. Vel was in his usual position to Rathvor's left. He looked rested. Better than rested. Settled, in a way he had not been on day one. The session moved toward the 10 territorial matter. This was the item Claire had written tomorrow about 3 days earlier. It was now that day. Prothvel stood before the item reached the floor. The consortium of 5 wishes to advance the consolidation protocol, he said. Given the procedural review period, the substance of the matter is ready for formal consideration. The substance of the matter was the 10's borders. Their autonomy. Their future on the terms they had built it. Prothvel's framework was legally constructed over 3 years. The debt leverage was real. The 10 had accumulated resource debts with 2 consortium members over 12 years, the kind that builds slowly and looks manageable until the mechanisms that were always embedded in it begin to activate. The voluntary incorporation language was precise enough that contesting it required either a specific legal argument grounded in treaty text or a moral one grounded in something harder to dismiss in a formal session. The consortium had built the legal argument carefully and at length. Claire looked at her notes. Prothvel continued, the 10 delegation has been provided full documentation of the consolidation terms. Their representative is invited to confirm receipt. The older 10 delegate said in a flat, controlled voice, we have received the documentation. And the terms are understood. A pause. They are understood. Prothvel moved to sit back down. Lena stood up. Not me. Lena. I want to say this clearly because it matters to say it clearly. It was Lena Hart who stood. 62 years old. Retired nurse. The person on this delegation who had spent 30 years in the specific work of sitting with beings in their worst moments without flinching and without looking away. The person who understood, at a level that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with who she was, the difference between a moment that could be held quietly and a moment that had to be answered out loud. She stood with her teacup still in her hand and said, in the flat, measured voice she used when she was precisely as serious as she sounded calm. Point of order. The room shifted. The 10 have not consented to incorporation, and their territorial sovereignty is protected under the Third Conclave Accords, which all 5 consortium members signed at the 9th Summit. Prothvel, the Accords allow for consensual transfer through debt resolution mechanisms, specifically as outlined in Article. The 10 delegate is crying, Lena said. The room went completely still. The younger 10 delegate was. She was looking at the surface of the table in front of her with the absolute concentration of someone managing something that has moved past the point of management, and there were tears on her face that she was not acknowledging because she was a diplomat in a formal session and she had held herself together for 6 days without breaking. She had held it for 6 days and now she was not, and Lena had said so. On the record. In a plenary session. On 17 simultaneous translation feeds. Lena set her teacup down on the table. That is not consent, she said. We are done here. She sat down. The room had a quality I had not felt in a plenary session in years. The quality of something having been named that was meant to stay unspoken. The quality of the space collapsing between a legal argument and the actual living reality of who the argument was being run against. The 10 delegate was a person. She was sitting in this room. She had held herself together for 6 days and she was crying, and Lena had said so, and every translation feed in the room had carried it. Prothvel opened his mouth. I stood up. The Earth delegation formally withdraws from this summit, I said. Complete silence. 3 full seconds. The kind of silence that has weight and texture and direction. Prothvel looked at me. Then at the room. He looked at the Vreth War priest, who was watching with an expression I could not read at all. He looked at Rathvor, who was very still. Then he looked back at me. Earth has no military presence at this summit, he said. Your withdrawal carries no defensive implication and does not materially alter. No, I said pleasantly. We don't have a military presence here. I reached into my coat. I took out my notepad. I uncapped my pen slowly. I wrote 2 words. I wrote them clearly, at a pace the room's cameras could follow. I held the notepad up. It said, we are calling them now. The room held its breath. I want to be honest about what that moment was, because the footage has been seen by a great many people since and interpreted in a great many ways, and most of those interpretations are somewhere between partially right and completely wrong. It was not a threat. It was not a performance. It was the clearest possible description of what peace actually is. Peace is not the absence of the capacity for conflict. Peace is that capacity choosing, every single day, to remain in a different state. Peace is a door held closed from the inside by people doing work like this work, in rooms like this room, for years and decades at a time. Peace is the thing on the other side of that door staying where it is because the people on this side of it have not needed to open it yet. This was the day I was showing the room where my hand was resting. Not opening the door. Just, my hand is on the handle, and I need you to know exactly where I am standing. Prothvel looked at the notepad. He looked at Claire, who had not moved and had no expression. He looked at Lena, who had sat back down and picked her teacup back up. He looked at Owen, who was watching from his seat with the particular patience of a person who has supervised 14 rebuilds and understands that the most important structural moment usually looks, from the outside, like nothing at all. He looked at the 10 delegates. The younger one had stopped crying. She was looking at our table. Prothvel looked at his 2 senior advisors. Something passed between the 3 of them without any words. He sat back down. The consortium of 5, he said, in a voice that was controlled and careful, will agree to a suspension of the consolidation protocol pending independent review of the debt mechanisms involved. A pause. Subject to conclave mediation. Claire said, Earth is satisfied with that outcome. 4 words. The session resumed. I put my notepad back in my coat. Beside me, Owen let out a breath he had been holding for approximately 90 seconds. Lena drank her tea. Sophie, who had been standing at the food service station at the edge of the floor with a container held in both hands, set it down with the careful steadiness of someone whose pulse has just returned from somewhere elevated. The younger 10 delegate looked at our table again. She did not smile. She did not nod. She made no acknowledgement that any recording would catch. She just looked. And then she looked back at the table in front of her and straightened in her seat and sat as tall as she had sat on any of the 6 previous days. The session ran for another 2 hours. The final agenda items were cleared. Closing statements were delivered. The conclave's administrative lead read the summit's summary outcomes, which were measured and did not reference notepad signs or formal withdrawal declarations or what a 62-year-old trauma counselor had said in the middle of a legal argument. Rathvor's closing statement was 6 sentences. It acknowledged the summit's outcomes, noted the Diraki's commitment to mediation on 3 outstanding border items, and expressed what his translator rendered as appreciation for the diplomatic engagement of all represented parties. He looked at our table when he said it. After the session closed, the floor cleared in the gradual way floors clear when a thing is finished. Delegations gathering documentation, collecting staff, moving toward transport. Sophie broke down the food station with the efficiency of someone who had done this in 8 different buildings on 8 different worlds. Owen was still mid-conversation with a Vreth Council member about structural specifications, continuing it slowly toward the exit doors. Lena was talking to Vel. Not in the corridor this time. At the edge of the main floor, standing together. They were not playing a card game. They were not doing the work of a formal corridor moment. They were just 2 people talking quietly, and whatever was being said, Vel stood differently after it than he had stood before it. I was at Earth's table finishing my own packing when Rathvor came to us one final time. He came alone. His translator was on and he left it on, which was itself a choice. Everything said would be recorded. He chose that deliberately. He stood across the table. I spent last night reading the full archive that was released, he said. I waited. Your species built something in those records that I have not seen documented in any other civilization's files, he said. What is that? The willingness to stop. He paused. Not because you had to. Not because you were finished. Because you decided to. I looked at him. That is harder than the building, he said. It was not a question. Yes, I said. He looked at Claire, who had finished packing and was standing quietly at the end of the table. He looked at Lena, now walking toward us with Vel beside her. He looked at Owen, still talking in the doorway with his stack of napkins. He looked at Sophie sealing the last container. He looked back at me. I asked the wrong question on day 4, he said. I waited. I asked where your military was, he said. I should have asked why they were not here. Most parties do not make that distinction, I said. I am making it now. He straightened. The answer is not what I would have expected. It rarely is, I said. Vel said something to Rathvor then, in their own language without a translator, something brief and direct. Rathvor's expression changed in a way I had not seen from him across the entire summit. It was small. It was genuine. He replied in the same language. Then he switched back to Galactic Common. We will see the Earth delegation at the 15th summit, HFY War. We will be there, I said. Same delegation. Something moved across his face. Very close to something I might have called amusement in a human being. No military, he said. No military, I said. He left. I stood at the empty table for a moment. Sophie came by with 2 cups of coffee she had made from the last of the station supplies. How did it go, she said. About as well as it goes. Good well or medium well? Somewhere between the 2, I said. Which is usually where the actual work lives. She nodded. She finished her coffee in the direct, fully present way she did everything, and went back to the last of the packing. I stood at the viewport. The floor around me was nearly empty. Through the summit building's outer observation panel I could see the orbital traffic feed. The consortium's ship had been running its pulse light since day 1 of the summit. Every morning when I woke up. Every night when I returned to the quarters. Every session I walked into the plenary hall. A slow, steady beat, 30 seconds apart. Look at what we brought. Look at what we are. Look at where we are parked. I watched it for a while. Then I watched it go. Not dramatically. Not in the sharp departure of a ship running an emergency protocol. Just, a ship that had been in one position choosing to be in another. Its running lights shrinking into the orbital traffic lanes and becoming indistinguishable from the ordinary movement of ships that were simply going somewhere and not making a point. It left orbit first. I finished my coffee. Then I helped Sophie carry the containers to the transport bay, and Owen held the door, and Lena found her card deck in her coat pocket and put it back, and Claire filed the last of the documentation, and we did the quiet, unheroic work of packing up and leaving a room that was, if not better than we had found it, then at least still standing. Which is, sometimes, the most you get. Which is, sometimes, exactly enough. My name is Mara Voss. I have been doing this job for 14 years. I have sat across tables from beings who could split a moon in half and asked them to reconsider. I have signed documents that stopped conflicts before they had names. I have eaten bad food in terrible rooms and good food in better ones, and I have come home from all of it changed in increments so small they only add up when you look back across the full distance. I do not talk about Kepler. I carry it. Quietly. Carefully. Aware of its weight. After Kepler, we agreed. We agreed that the summit was the point. That the table was the point. That Lena's corridor and Owen's napkins and Sophie's food and 2 words written on a notepad and held up in a still room, that all of it was the point. Not because we were gentle. Not because we had no other capacity. Because we had thought very carefully about what the other capacity cost, and we had looked at that cost clearly and without flinching, and we had chosen this instead. Every day. On purpose. The dreadnought left orbit first. It always does, when it finally understands what it has been parked next to. God help them all. I mean it every single time.